I still need is not enough work. Can I put that out there? Okay, so, and I will let you give a proper teaser for October the measure. But I just wanted to let everyone know that in October, the Sapphire Lodge is going to perform the Babalon working here. The Babalon working. Liber 15.
No, not Liber 15.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, right. The Babalon working.
I'll cover it.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. Babalon working. They're going to perform the Babalon working. And Craig, I will let them properly introduce that at the end of your talk to look forward. And of course, Jack Parsons' anniversary is 100 years in October. So we're very excited. I'm going to stop talking, and Craig, I'm going to let you take it away with the world of Jack Parsons.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Some of you are on the uptake. Thank you. These two talks today dovetail very neatly because Jack Parsons, the guy that I'm going to be talking about, was an active member of the LA Science Fantasy Society. He hung around with people like Robert Heinlein and another member of the society at the time, Ron Hubbard. We'll get to that interesting story during the course of our talk today. Jack Parsons has become culturally very current, especially in Los Angeles, and especially over the last couple of years. There's a resurgence of interest in him and his story. And why not? The man lived a truly astonishing life. He was an action hero. He was a rocket scientist. He was a Marxist. He was an occultist. He was involved in experimental communities, polygamy, you name it. The man was doing it, and he was doing it far before the rest of the hippies caught up with him in the 60s. All of that has been well covered in a couple of good print biographies. I recommend Strange Angel by Pendle, but there's another one called Sex and Rockets, which is a little more lurid, but gets most of the basic facts right. Esoteric, our hosts for the Salon today, run a tour through Pasadena where you get to see some of the important places from the Jack Parsons story, places he lived, where he worked, etc. So, biography of Parsons is relatively thick on the ground right now. So, when I was first asked to do this talk, I said, why do you do a biography of Parsons? And I said, no. I'm not going to do that. Those are easy to find. I'm going to talk about what Parsons was actually into. Because you can't understand Parsons as a magician, Parsons as an experimenter in social dynamics, even Parsons as a political entity, unless you understand his philosophy and his magical practice. Which is why my working title for this talk was, You Don't Know Jack. Next slide, please. He doesn't want to leave.
I've never had that experience before. It was like I had to
Go. I'll teach you a good vanishing.
Hey, where's that, Greg?
That is the famous Arroyo up above Caltech, near where the modern site of JPL is. This shows Jack, the one on the far right there, and some of his compatriots during the early days of their rocket testing. The thing that Jack Parsons is known in the outer world for best is as a pioneer of rocketry. He was responsible for perfecting the recipe for solid core rocket engines, which were used on everything from Genesis to takeoff engines during World War II, right up to the solid rockets that launched the space shuttle into orbit. He is the pioneer of that, and he's recognized for that achievement. There's a crater, a rather large one, on the far side of the moon, named Parsons, in his honor for his contributions to the rocket program. I'm not going to talk about that at all today. Again, that's well covered. The other parts of his biography are more interesting with respect to what we're talking about today, which was, as I said before, Parsons was an experimenter. He spent his entire life trying things out. And you can see this in his rocketry career as everywhere else. There's a pattern that he rushes in to a new and interesting area without fully preparing himself, and something explodes in his face. It happens over and over and on all planes, and we'll see parts of that as we go through today. But to give you the outline of his biography, as I said, he was a rocket experimenter in the 30s. He helped found the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in the 40s. But due to his experimentation with politics and the like, he was considered a poor security risk later in his life, lost his clearance, lost his ability to work in rocketry, and ended his life basically creating explosions for the movies, like squibs and prop explosions and the like. And it was one of those that killed him. That's what he was mixing up in his own laboratory that day in 1952. When something went wrong, he dropped a vial of fulminated mercury, and that ended his life. So he went out with a bang, quite literally. Next slide. So what was it that fueled this experimentalism? What was the dynamic behind Jack Parsons? Well, I would submit that it was in one form or another throughout his life, magic. Not magic, stage magic, but magic the way that Aleister Crowley called it, magic with a K to distinguish it from prestidigitation. Aleister Crowley, and by the way, the proper pronunciation is Crowley, not Crowley. Do not listen to Ozzy Osbourne, he is wrong. There's a beautiful bit of doggerel that Crowley had. Those who think me foully insist to call me Crowley, but those who know me wholly will always call me Crowley. So, see, now you'll be able to remember. Aleister Crowley defined magic as the art and science of causing change in conformity with will. And in that form, that definition seems to expand to cover the entirety of life and the cosmos, because it does. Crowley also said, every willed act is a magical act. So in other words, your desire to see these two talks today manifest in the form of a series of incantations and invocations. You looked on the web to see when and where it was going to be held. You made sure your car was filled with gasoline. You fulfilled the conditions of getting into the car and turning on the ignition and driving over here and finding parking. And all of these things were a formula of invocation that allowed you to be in this room now and hearing me talk. Congratulations, though, mages. Very well done. But of course, what we really tended to talk about, and even those of us who do this for a living, so to speak, tend to gloss over this difference, is technical or ritual magic. Things like you see pictured here. This is actually an equinox altar from a ceremony performed at one of our local OTO bodies, and we'll be talking about Ordo Templi Orientis in a few minutes. Jack Parsons was an engineer by nature, and he was an adventurer by character, so he was attempting to engineer reality. He figured that if he could mix up a batch of chemicals and cause a rocket to soar thousands of feet in the air, he can mix up a batch of demons and cause his desires to be made manifest in the world. And so it goes back all through human history. According to legend, King Salon was given permission by God to use demons to build his temple because he had them under proper control. Magic is effectively the art and science of getting your personal demons sufficiently under control that you can get them aimed in one direction and get something done. That is what magic is really all about. And Parsons was a magician. Parsons thought of himself as being capable of pulling this off. And sometimes he was. There's a wonderful story that Parsons tells about himself. The first recording we have of this bent of his, that at the age of 15, having been raised on a steady diet of fantasy and science fiction stories, he decided, why can't I summon Satan? You know, seems like the kind of thing that an ordinary red-blooded American kid would do in his room on a Saturday afternoon, right? So he found some sort of grimoire, some formula that in his mind would be sufficient for summoning Satan, and went through all of the ritual motions to make this happen, and it worked. And it scared the living daylights out of him. He renounced all magic for about 10 years. One of the very few times he showed a very active survival reflex. Next slide. So magic, as I said, encompasses everything. Magic is the art and science of causing change in conformity with will. And in that regard, it can encompass anything from the prayer of a devout Christian to the animism of a shaman, to any other form of attempting to distort reality in such a way that our will is achieved. Thelema is a particular specialization of that idea. Thelema, again, is a system that Aleister Crowley developed, based on a book that he received called the Book of the Law. He was basically doing an invocatory working while in Cairo in 1904, and as a result of this invocation he received, had dictated to him by his account, this book, 3 chapters, relatively short, 220 verses, called the Book of the Law, or Liber XLIX, which purports to create a new formula of attainment or a new formula of existence in our world, a new Aeon of human life. One in which the law may be summed up, as I started this talk, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Now, most people hearing that hear infinite license. Well, do whatever you want to is a paraphrase. Nothing could possibly be further from the truth of Thelema. Do what thou wilt means do that one thing that you will. That single purpose for which you were incarnated in this world and nothing else. Properly understood, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law is the greatest constraint under which an individual can possibly live, because it excludes anything which is not one-pointedly focused on doing your will and nothing else. Thelema is a system that Jack Parsons embraced. He spent a long time wandering around experimenting during his late 20s, early 30s with other forms of thought, both esoteric and political. He flirted with Marxism, he flirted with Buddhism, he wandered around through theosophy. He was sampling the buffet table. He was trying to find a system that would work for him. And finally, some friends took him to see a Gnostic Mass, which we'll talk about a little bit later, at the local OTO body, and he was sold. He was like, ah, okay, this is the system that I've been looking for. This idea of Thelema, this idea of absolute one-pointed devotion, one might almost say like a rocket guided truly into space, with all of its thrust pointing in a single chosen direction. That was the formula through which he would find his expression. And he remained a devoted Thelemite, as the term for someone who practices Thelema is a Thelemite. He remained a Thelemite from roughly 1939 until his death in 1952. This symbol that you see on the screen behind me is as close as we have to a sort of universal symbol for Thelema, the way, say, the cross is for Christianity. You can see that it consists of a single figure. It's a single line, which is why it's called the unicursal hexagram, a one-line, six-sided figure. You can think of it as being like a Star of David, which is 2 intertwining separate triangles representing the divine and human life melded together into one. Here, they're not merely superimposed on one another, but become identical to one another. One of the central teachings of Thelema is that God is man, and man is God. That there is no distinction between us and God, that God dwells within us, which is a fairly heady thing. That's why I'm saying that being a Thelemite is not the path of great ease, but rather of ultimate responsibility, because when you're God, there's this enormous fear that you're going to mess up the universe, and it'll be your fault. On the topic of Thelema, as usual, as we'll see, Jack Parsons had some different things to say from the mainstream. He was always taking some relatively well-understood theory or practice and twisting it in his own unique direction. One of his most famous essays, he was a relatively prolific writer. He wrote a great deal of bad poetry and a number of really good essays. And his best known and probably widest read essay is Freedom is a Two-Edged Sword, which is an essay that he wrote on the topic of what I was just talking about, which is that Thelema is not merely liberty, but responsibility. Here's what he had to say. Freedom is a two-edged sword, of which one edge is liberty, and the other responsibility. Both edges are exceeding sharp, and the weapon is not suited to casual, cowardly, or treacherous hands. Since all tyrannies are based on dogma, and since all dogmas are based on lies, it behooves us to look beyond them for truth and freedom, for both will be far away. And yet the truth is that we know nothing. It is necessary that we defend freedom unless we all wish to be slaves. It is expedient that we achieve brotherhood unless we desire destruction. And it is convenient that we grant others the right to their own opinions and lifestyles in order to maintain our own. Spoken like a true engineer. It's not idealism, it's practically. If we do this, it'll be better for us. All right, next slide. Ordo Templi Orientis. OTO is the organization of which I and several other folks who are here today are members. It was not founded by Aleister Crowley, but Aleister Crowley remolded it into its current form. Ordo Templi Orientis means the Order of the Temple of the East, or the Order of the Oriental Templars. It is an offshoot originally of German esoteric masonry. How often do you get to say that? I do a lot. But circa 1900, a group of high-degree Masons decided among themselves that they had identified the true inner secret of Freemasonry. The thing that all of what was actually said in existing standard Freemasonry was merely hinting at, alluding to. They decided that they had come up with the actual core secrets of Freemasonry and thought they should tell someone about it. So they formed a group called Ordo Templi Orientis, which originally was going to be sort of a graduate school of Freemasonry. You'd take people who had been all the way through all the existing systems, say up to 32nd degree of the Scottish Rite, and then you'd say, and now how would you like to come over to our organization and we'll tell you what really just happened to you. It didn't survive in that form. There weren't enough Masons who were interested in doing that, for one thing. And for another, a couple of the founders were very interested in having women participate in this, because part of that inner secret that they thought they found was tantric in nature. And a body with all men in it can do tantric work, but of a limited nature. So the OTO became its own organization, split off from Masonry, and under Aleister Crowley became an explicitly Thelemic organization, devoted to the law of Thelema, devoted to the promulgation of this idea of freedom balanced with responsibility. And there's a beautiful statement of our purpose. OTO is dedicated to the high purpose of securing the liberty of the individual and his or her advancement in light, wisdom, understanding, knowledge, and power through beauty, courage, and wit on the foundation of universal brotherhood. Now, not only is that stirring, but if you're a Kabbalist, it's got a secret message in it. I'll leave that to your own researches. That's the wonderful thing. All of this, the reason I mentioned that, all of this idea of Thelema and Crowley's form of magic and the mysteries of the OTO are laid down on a foundation of a particular strain of Gnosticism, which is the idea that it is possible to know the mind of God, whether externally or within yourself, through study, through knowledge, rather than through faith. That's the great split of Western religious traditions. Whether you simply accept and have faith and are saved from outside, or whether you're saved through your own work in coming to understand some great inner secret. Basically, whether you're doing the walking or whether you're being carried. And throughout history, there have been those who preferred walking. And you can see in things like Qabalah and like the secret I alluded to hidden in something that appears in the first sentence of our OTO US Grand Lodge webpage, you can see this Gnostic thread that works underneath everything else. Well, think just for a moment how much this appealed to Jack Parsons, who was a devotee of folk mystery stories and adventures. And, the great archaeologist Indiana Jones piercing through the secrets hidden in the ancient ruins. This was that in the real world. This was that made manifest. It's like if I can figure out enough of these arcane systems, if I can grow in knowledge and skill enough, I myself, through my own work, can achieve union with God. That's catnip for somebody of his nature. There's a reason why, and it's a very strong correlation. So many engineers and especially computer scientists are magicians. and members of organizations like Ordo Templi Orientis, because we're used to the idea that if I can come up with the right invocation, I can make anything happen. If I can write the right program, I can make a computer do anything. This is just that on a larger scale. All right, now we get into the fun stuff. Next slide. There we go. Who here has heard of John Dee? One of the most fascinating people in world history. He lived circa 1600. He was a close friend and advisor of Queen Elizabeth. You can see here in a painting with him. He was another one who, like Jack Parsons, did everything, knew everyone, went everywhere, and lived a cinematic life. He was a secret agent for the Elizabethan government. Queen Elizabeth thought that the continent and her own court were filled with conspiracies against her, and she was right. She was one of those rare cases where maybe she wasn't even quite paranoid enough. It was a really dangerous time to be Queen of England, and there were a lot of forces moving externally and internally trying to disrupt her control or actively kill her. Britain was militarily on the defensive at the time. Spain was in the ascendant. And John Dee came along and offered his services to her as what you can only refer to as court magician. Dee was a student of these same mysteries I've been talking about. He was of that school of Gnosticism that said, if I can discover the secret keys of the universe, I can achieve all the power I need. I can achieve God within myself, or at least communicate with God directly without the need for intercessors. And he had enormous success in this. One of the most famous stories about him, which of course, no way to prove it, but the story goes that when the Spanish Armada set out to invade southern England, an invasion against which England was all but helpless, their armies were committed elsewhere, there were no coastal fortifications manned, they were basically just lying there waiting for the Spaniards to take southern England. Well, John Dee whipped up a storm off the southern coast of England and utterly destroyed the Spanish Armada. They lost 2/3 of their ships. Yes, go John. So this is the kind of guy we're talking about. Just to put the icing on that cake, as I mentioned, he also served as a spy. He was a man of letters and well-known. He had friends everywhere. So he was welcome in courts all across the continent. As a friend. He was friends with other monarchs, other nobles. And he had really good ears. So he would go traveling around, having wine and talking philosophy with people in Germany and Spain and France, and then send coded missives home to the court with, this is what they're planning in Burgundy. This is the word I picked up in Antwerp. And he would sign those reports with a glyph that looked like 2 eyes with a slanty brow over them. 007. So, I'm sorry, this guy is just much larger than life. Should I really come back and just do a whole presentation on Dee, so he has no connection to Los Angeles?
Perfect.
I mean, no, I'm sorry, no connection.
That is not required. You do.
All right, there you go. So, why am I talking about Dee so much? Well, I mentioned he was a magician. He came up with a system of magic, referred to as Enochian magic. Enoch in the Bible is said to have been able to converse directly with angels. And Dee, being the Gnostic engineer that he was, said, well, if Enoch could talk with angels, why can't I talk with angels? There's no fundamental reason why that shouldn't work. Let's give it a shot. So he and a compatriot named Edward Kelly began basically doing ritual and vision work, trying to achieve contact with angelic forces, trying to basically get the angels to talk to them. And they succeeded. They worked out a system whereby they would go into a particular ritual trance state, and they would see angels holding up tablets with strange characters on them and pointing at them. and showing. It's like go here and then go here, and then I put this one over here. It was basically sacred Scrabble is the best way I can describe it. And over time, built up a magical system based on these tablets, which would allow you to control the elements, for example, stirring up giant storms, or to communicate with various angelic and demonic forces, or to achieve knowledge of anything hidden from you, or all these wonderful techniques of magic all flow out of this Enochian system. Interestingly, they abandoned their work when they contacted a god that scared them too much. And that god was actually a goddess named Babalon. And we'll be talking about her a little later on. Magicians since the early 17th century, when all this went on, have periodically pulled out Enochian magic, which is one of the very few forms that has a good track record. Somebody tried it and left a record showing it works. So magicians are always looking to pull it out, file off the serial numbers, and try it themselves. So, long about the late 19th century, early 20th century, the magicians of the Golden Dawn, a very famous occult group in Britain of which Crowley was a member, went through the latest cycle of pulling out the Enochian system, figuring out there's some anomalies and difficulties with the way it's left for us by Ian Kelly, so everyone has to reinvent pieces of it. It's sort of contradictory if you just take their source material. So they came up with a coherent version of what Enochian should look like and began experimenting with it, and got results. Well, as I told you, Crowley was in the Golden Dawn. Crowley was teaching people Enochian magic. Jack Parsons joins Crowley's OTO. He learns Enochian and falls in love. The Enochian system became one of his primary working techniques for the remainder of his career, as a way, again, of both causing events to occur that he wanted to and obtaining knowledge. There's always those sort of two poles of magic, finding things out and making things happen, and Enochian's good for both of them. So I'm going to give you an idea. I told you this is a language. That Enochian is a spoken and written language. It has its own script. I'm going to read just a phrase of what's known as the seventh call, which is for the tablet of water of air. And, oh spirits, I'm just quoting. Don't want it.
Does that work?
Yes, I hope.
Yeah. I'll tell you in 5 minutes.
Rossi Salman Bargir Zoi Krawai Rapaki Ane Gutmano Dinoasi Parigyal Kasmagyal.
That's what Enochian sounds like. And the part that I just read, by the way, translates as, the east is a house of virgins, singing praises among the flames of first glory, wherein the Lord hath opened his mouth. So, kind of pretty, but kind of scary in the original. And it's very effective. It really does get the job done. I have had my ass kicked by Enochian and stuff on several occasions, so I can vouch that it is as powerful as he and Crowley and Parsons vouch for it. All right, next slide. Now we get into, I told you that Parsons was incapable of using any system without putting his own spin on it. Witchcraft is at the top of that list. At this time, people like Gerald Gardner, famously, others were involved in a sort of revival of witchcraft, especially in Britain, but spilling over into the United States. The idea of recovering a lost tradition of nature worship, of the divine feminine, of all these ideas that had been suppressed by the patriarchal religions and culture of Western Europe. And Parsons got interested in that. But he stirred it in with all these other ideas of Thelema and Masonry and ancient traditions and Gnosticism. And so what came out was this very strange kind of witchcraft. When he talks about witchcraft, it's different from what anyone else ever has meant by witchcraft. It is, for one thing, strongly and practically feminist. Practically real world feminist. It was all about women have to throw off their chains and claim their place in the world and be seen as co-equal with men in every possible field and have no restrictions placed on them. And this is, 1942, 43. It was relatively heady stuff for the time. But also seeing that as an aspect of the divine feminine. The idea that the goddess is as important an archetype and as powerful an archetype as the god, and again, those two need to be seen in each individual in order for mankind to be spiritually healthy. And I have a rather lengthy quote from his most famous essay on witchcraft, We Are the Witchcraft. We are the oldest organization in the world. When man was born, we were. We sang the first cradle song. We healed the first wound. We comforted the first terror. We were the guardians against the darkness, the helpers on the left-hand side. Rock drawings in the Pyrenees remember us, and little clay images made for an old purpose when the world was new. Our hand was on the old stone circles, the monolith, the dolmen, and the druid oak. We sang the first hunting songs. We made the first crops to grow. When man stood naked before the powers that made him, we sang the first chant of terror and wonder. We wooed among the pyramids, watched Egypt rise and fall, ruled for a space in Chaldea and Babylon, the mating kings. We sat among the secret assemblies of Israel and danced the wild and stately dances in the sacred groves of Greece. I got away with words. But that is not the sort of thing that one would expect to hear in a modern Wiccan coven. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, if there are any Wiccans in the room, but that is taking it in a much deeper, darker, weirder direction than you will hear virtually anybody doing it. And that was what he meant by witchcraft. And it was tightly interwound with his ideas of Gnosticism and deep occult history, as you could hear in that quote. He's creating almost a Masonic Wicca, where it is the guardian of these deep mysteries and the carrier of this continuous current, but it is a very Gnostic version of what that current should be. So here we are. We have Jack, who has fallen in with the nefarious members of that terrible organization, the LA Science Fantasy Society, and also joining the OTO. He has, in fact, by the mid-40s, become the local lodge master in Ordo Templi Orientis and is running it out of his home in Pasadena. Much like what we would call today a commune or experimental community. There's a lot of OTO people living there. There's a lot of non-OTO people, various, bohemian types, artists, writers, and other questionable sorts. And he's doing it all as an experiment in Thelema. It's like, all right, if we create a world, a little micro world in which do what thou wilt is the ruling principle, in which we all have the utmost respect for each other's paths while trying not to get in their way, but also not allowing them to run over us, how does that work? And in point of fact, that very question is what the modern OTO, again, I'm a member, a lot of people back there are, is still trying to solve. How do you basically have a society of polite gods? It's a challenge. So he's running this household. He's also doing his magical work. And then all of the threads of this come together when he decides that he is going to invoke the spirit of Babalon into physical existence. Which is such a crazy idea that Aleister Crowley is brought up short. When Aleister Crowley is sending you a telegram saying, "You maniac, what are you doing?" Anyone but Jack Parsons would stop and pause and think. No, full speed ahead. So he and several compatriots, including Ron Hubbard, who was his Edward Kelly, his assistant in these Enochian workings, began the process of attempting to invoke the spirit of Babalon into physical appearance. By the way, Ron Hubbard would later claim that he was a spy sent by naval intelligence to break up this ring. And by the way, he said he got the orders from Robert Heinlein. Yeah. So, see, all these talks tie together if you wait long enough. So, Ron, Jack, various other members of the community who are there are doing this Enochian working, a series of Enochian workings. This is not your grandpas, this is not John Dee's Enochian. There are many more bodily fluids involved in Jack's flavor of Enochian working than one would find, at least so far as John Dee left records. He's, again, what's the pattern I told you? He's putting his own spin on everything he does. And in this case, he is taking the tantric sex magic ideas that were brought in via OTO, blending them in with the Enochian ideas that he came from John Dee via Golden Dawn and Crowley, mixing those in with the witchcraft and this idea of the divine feminine, and then pinning all of that back to Babalon, who we first heard from in the Enochian system. So you can see how this working basically was taking all of these ideas that he was part of and tying them up into a beautiful, neat bundle. And it worked. He and Ron were out in the desert doing one phase of this ritual. It was expected to be a long series of rituals. And suddenly Jack stops and says, "We're done. Let's go home." Okay? And they go home, and a woman has shown up to visit another member of the household named Marjorie Cameron, who has brilliant red hair and an appearance. Well, let's take a look at Marjorie. Forward. You can see, I mean, here obviously she's somewhat enhanced for one of Kenneth Enger's movies, but the no makeup, relatively less crazy hair Marjorie was very nearly that intense. I actually had the great honor of knowing her late in her life when she was very old and dying of cancer. And this is, every now and then I permit myself a little bit of woo. Usually I try and stay very grounded and practical when I'm giving a talk like this. But when I was with her, you'd look at her in the bed and you'd see a frail old woman dying of cancer, and then you'd turn your head to go do something and you'd see this young, vibrant woman out of the corner of your eye. And then you turn back and there's the old sick woman again. And it happened over and over. It was really eerie. So yeah, Marjorie had a whole lot of something going on.
What about Firestone?
Oh, okay. You only get that story every other talk, all right?
He's obsessed.
So, poor Marjorie had no idea any of this was going on. She was just there visiting a friend, and suddenly these two crazy men come back from the desert, covered in sand, and go all goggle-eyed when they see her. But apparently, I don't know if you noticed on that first slide, but Jack was the handsomest occultist in human history. So he managed to get past first impressions and actually connected with Cameron. The two of them became a couple and later married one another, actually. And at that point, it became she became part of the working. She knew nothing about magic, but he pulled her in and began teaching her about the Enochian system they were using and so forth, and brought her in on further rituals. And this is where, again, very insightful. I told you that Jack had this tendency to, as I like to say, ready, fire, aim. In his rocketry work, in his magic work, he was just a little bit sloppy, which of course made his fellow rocket experimenters really love him. But his fellow magical experimenters also talked about the fact, and Crowley again thought he was a complete nutcase. He made the most fundamental mistake it's possible to make in Enochian magic. He received, as part of this whole series of Enochian workings, I told you how Crowley had received, via divine dictation, the Book of the Law. And Jack Parsons like, well, if Crowley can do it, I can do it. I want a holy book. And he got one. Liber 49, the Book of Babalon, which I like to refer to as the fourth chapter of the threefold Book of Law. It's an appendix of the Book of the Law that Crowley wrote, a sort of a commentary or extension, purportedly dictated by or on behalf of the goddess Babalon, and talking about her formula in this new Aeon of Thelema. In it, she gives explicit instructions in a term of art that would be familiar to anyone who's been working with Enochian magic. Seek me in the seventh air. I told you how Enochian is all about subdivisions and categorizations and things. There are 16 elemental sub-tablets for all the combinations of the 4 elements by themselves. Like earlier I was doing water, air, that kind of thing. There's also these 30 sort of shells of reality around ours, going out getting more and more rarefied as the numbers get lower until like the first one is practically non-existent. It's so far beyond human consciousness. So the seventh one is relatively far out in that distance. And she's saying, if you want to further contact the spirit, here's my number, basically. And he records assiduously the workings that follow from getting Liber 49. And actually doesn't really write down what he does. He actually provides the text so we can document that he got it wrong. He instead uses the seventh call, which is the water of air tablet that I did you earlier. So rather than going for the most esoteric, remote possible realm of experience that the human ego could possibly maintain some sort of communication with, he's getting an elemental. And his life takes a downward trajectory from there. That was actually the point at which he began having difficulties with his security clearance. That was the point where a few years later he and Cameron began having difficulties in separating from one another. L. Ron Hubbard ran off with his sort of wife's sister. It was complicated. Read the books if you're interested. It's a soap opera. And took his money and his boat. A number of very bad things began happening, culminating, of course, in this explosion in his home laboratory that killed him. So it's one of those cautionary tales. He was a brilliant man. He was motivated. He was creative. He was passionate. And he wasn't careful. And any flaw like that will catch up with you in the end. Then what he lacked was caution. So let this be a lesson to you, oh you budding magicians in the audience. Read the manual. All right, next slide. As I've mentioned a few times during the course of this talk, we, Ordo Templi Orientis, are still doing this stuff. We are right up there in La Crescenta, Star Sapphire Lodge, OTO, one of about 50 local OTO bodies. In just the United States, we're also worldwide. I actually had the great honor of helping establish the Grand Lodges of Italy and Croatia just a couple months ago, which was very exciting. So if you have become interested in what we're doing, there are at least two ways that you can fulfill that curiosity. One of them, as Richard mentioned, is that in October, my colleague Suzanne Torchia is going to be doing not the, but a Babalon working here. It is not going to be the same one that Jack Parsons did.
Thank you, Fred. Good.
Yeah, yes. That would be very poor magical hygiene. But there will be a Babalon working that will be held right here at Salon. And Suzanne has been working with the Babalon current as part of an annual ritual that we do called Babalon Puja, which is a full weekend devoted to the Divine Feminine that we do October of every year. It is really quite an experience. And through other aspects of her work as well. That's just like the highlight of a lot of work she's done with Babalon. So that should be really quite remarkable. Or, if you dare, if you can summon the courage, you can come visit us at our dark, scary lodge in La Crescenta. The sum of its dark scariness is it could use a new coat of paint, I think, at this point. But no, we welcome visitors. We have many public events. The Gnostic Mass, which I referred to earlier, which is our central ritual. It's highly suitable for newcomers. We invite people. We love it when people come because it's sort of the most compact way of sharing what we're about. Once you've seen the Mass, you'll have a much better idea of what OTO is for, what we want to do with the world. If you are interested in that, we have over here on the side table a box of pamphlets. Please take one. It includes all the contact info you need in order to get a hold of us if you're interested. There's also a sign-up sheet where if you give us your email address, please, pretty legibly, we will email you. We'll put you on our public announcement list for when there are public events at the lodge. And again, all of our masses, with a very few exceptions, are public, and a lot of our other events are public too. So if you find yourself intrigued by what I told you about Jack Parsons' career today, we would be happy to help you in your ambition to walk in his footsteps while taking a swerve at a critical point. Love is a law, love under will. if the previous speaker had bad eyes, I have like bad eyes. So I'm going to ask Richard to help me find people to
Okay, so, okay, any questions? Let's get started. Yes, Victor.
You did mention that the development of solid rocket fuel, you implied that there was also magical ritual associated with it. Is that what I'm getting?
Oh yeah, he did.
Let's repeat the question.
Oh, by all means, yeah, I'll do that.
Okay.
Yeah, you asked whether in his rocketry work he used ritual in that. Yes, he most certainly did. He was fond of reciting the hymn to Pan, which is a particularly wonderful homoerotic poem about the great god Pan. He was actually fond of reciting that from the balcony of his house at parties. But he was well known when they were doing test shots. See me over there just rhythmically chanting his invocation of Pan to make the rocket work properly. Yeah. What a guy. Yes?
I was wondering if you know where in the desert Hubbard and Jack did the Babalon working exactly, and also, if I remember right, Peter Levenda mentions in one of his books that when they did the working, they like opened an interdimensional doorway and something came in. I'm wondering if you have any opinion on that.
Well, I'll let Richard has actually, I believe, found the spot. So you tell that story, and then I'll talk about dimensional doorways.
Okay, so Roland Lafayette Hubbard said he worked for the Navy. China Lake Naval Base. China Lake is a naval base in Ridgecrest, California. Benjamin Bush founded the China Lake Naval Base to go against Army Corps of Engineers Manhattan Project. China Lake, Parsons, I believe, was at China Lake. China Lake contains within its sealed compound the Coso petroglyph sites too. And then I believe that, and I've been there, and I believe that the Babalon working by Parsons and Hubbard was invented at one of the two petroglyph sites at China Lake. If you go there, two of the first petroglyphs you see are E equals MC squares and the initials JP. Okay, within 5 minutes of you entering the canyon, and then there are of course 12,000 shaman targets that are 7,000 years old. And it's in an arroyo.
There you go.
Like the arroyo.
Well, yeah, Jack loved his arroyos. And as for pulling something through, that was the whole point of the rite, was to bring in this Babalon energy or current, and they Jack stopped in the middle and said, "We're done. We got something." He felt something come in and went home and found Marjorie waiting for him. Which the purpose of the rite was to get a physical embodiment, and it worked. What else came through with that? Well, again, this fueled a series of rituals that they did that led to other things like, Liber 49. Some of the other, the house was filled with poltergeist phenomena during this whole period. The other residents of the house were complaining about it. So, it's clear they stirred something up. It's inarguable that they stirred the pot somehow.
Yes, blue shirt back there.
There are two books on the life of Jack Parsons. One is Strange Angel by Michael Penning. The other is Sex and Rockets by someone by the name of John Carter, and that's an alien. There's a film option on the back of the second edition of Sex and Rockets by somebody by the name of John Flint from Henry Films. Would you happen to know the identity of John Carter?
So the question is, what is the identity of the author of Sex and Rockets?
Oh, Sex and Rockets? Yeah, I got that. Hang on. I don't recall it offhand.
I think it's a pseudonym.
Yes, the question is, what is the real name for the author of Sex and Rockets?
John Murphy had the film option from Henry Films. Henry Films is not going to use it.
No, sorry, I don't know that one. That's it, I lose. Who's up next?
That's easy. No more questions. Ruth, you don't have a question?
I want to know who wants to know what the identity is of the writer. Why he thinks it's a pseudonym and why he wants to know the identity
Well,
of the
the
writer.
name of the writer is John Carter, which is a Edgar Rice Burroughs character. So, that screams pseudonym to me.
Yeah.
No more questions?
All right, well, if there are further questions, again, there's a lot of OTO folks in your midst, even as we speak. So feel free. We love answering questions. Again, material over here for you to pick up, sign-up sheet. And once again, October, be here for Babalon.
One more question.
Yeah.
Greg will forgive me, I hope. It's not really a question. I just wanted to add in that Yes Star Sapphire Lodge is a Los Angeles local OTO body. I know that from our experience with the past, last year, many people have traveled. Don't forget that we have other local bodies in the area. If you are in Orange County, please feel free, and they'd be happy to welcome you to go to Golden Lotus Lodge, which is our sister body in Orange County. And if you happen to be in San Diego, there is Aria. So we're all over. You can find us.
We're everywhere.
All right. And one last thing, Suzanne, you're going to be giving a talk in August.
Yes.
To lead up to the October Babalon working. You're going to give a talk, I believe the working title between us is Life in the Craft.
Well, it's actually, I'm going to have to change it.
Oh, good.
You keep wanting me to go back to craft, and I'm sorry, I'm a Thelema, so it's going to have to be hard to get everything here. Actually, it will be living a magical life, and I'm very brazenly going to try to cover both crafting, Thelema, and general living, because there certainly is a way to do many of these workings simply by getting up in the morning and having a cup of coffee. And I'd like to hear some ideas on that. Please join us.
And so that would be in August, the August.
So yeah, do be there for that. The idea of living a magical life, there's nothing more important if you want to be a practicing magician. Magic in a box doesn't work. If you do magic on Saturday nights and then put it back in the closet, unless it's your hobby you enjoy, it's not going to get you anywhere. You have to do it full time for it to do any good whatsoever. And on that, thank you very much.
So we're done. It's about 10 after 2, in about 20 minutes. Nathan, our staff, and I are going to start our walking tour of Broadway. We're going to talk about Robert Brown, an important 19th century architect who built Palace next door. Kim just published a novel. You have a copy for sale. This is probably a good time to pick one up. I want to thank everyone. We're going to see you next month. Next month's Salon, history of Citrus Fruit in Southern California, Charlie Chaplin in the Keystone Studios, and Gordon is we're going to have a talk about historic mapping, historical map overlays over Google Maps. Gordon did some work on Old Bunker Hill, and Charlotte Wolter's going to come in and talk about that. So we look forward to seeing all of you. Get a flyer if you don't have one. If you want to get on a walking tour, just wait another 20 minutes. And thank you again so much. And let's thank both. There's Bill.